Everybody comes to us because they want what we have always done, which is contemporary design with a timeless flair that attempts to speak to design ideas that transcend style and transcend place. So in a neighborhood like this and on a site like this, there's not a huge amount of freedom. This is a pie-shaped lot that opens up to a cul-de-sac, and because we wanted to preserve outdoor living, where we're sitting at the moment is part of a larger outdoor living idea, and the large windows and the expansive glass that blur the lines between the outdoor living component and the indoors really help to bring the outdoors in and vice versa. But before I get too caught up in that, solar orientation is what it is. Once you organize the vehicular access and you organize the pedestrian access to the front door, the solar access is really what was left over, quite honestly. So we frequently go after a strong southern exposure for photovoltaics or thermal solar. In this property, our primary move was about fitting the site and preserving as much space as possible, getting the automobile out of the front and center of the experience, getting the automobile to be secondary and allowing the pedestrian experience to be the primary driver. So what you'll see when you look at the front of the house is a pedestrian-friendly entryway with the automobiles being secondary, and their garage or their home, their storage area is out of sight, out of mind largely. And that's something I fight hard for. I think what you'll see in this neighborhood more often than not is garages that are front and center, and a house maybe not quite this bad, but houses that are almost feel incidental to the garage. In some neighborhoods that's more overt than it is in this neighborhood, but we really want the human experience to be the primary driver. So connection for the pedestrian from the front door to the sidewalk, to encourage walking, to discourage cars. That's all part of our design philosophy. And that's a perfect segue from the earlier conversation, because the 40,000-foot organization was driven by the shape of the lot, a pie shape. And our attitudes about prioritizing the pedestrian over the automobile already begins to diminish the remaining opportunities once you've made those kinds of decisions. And then when you factor in another filter, which is the design covenant of this neighborhood and the nature of these homes, which in my opinion have too many roofs and are overly complicated. Our goal was to create an outcome that felt like it belonged in this neighborhood to some degree, to follow in to some degree, but also to lead toward a simpler, cleaner solution. Because quite honestly, a lot of roofs on top of a house is a function of working in plan, but not taking the time to reconcile the three-dimensional nature of a house with the plan. It's always a circular process, not a linear process. So a simple solution is actually more difficult to arrive at. In this case, because of the automotive accommodation and the nature of the lot, the pedestrian entry almost worked itself out, and we wanted it to be under a portion of the roof that was more vertical and therefore more visible, to bring attention to the front door and to celebrate the front porch more than the garage. So if you look at the house, there's a hierarchy. The pedestrian volume is high on the hierarchy of things, and it diminishes down from there to the garage, which is the lowest, smallest, less celebrated. And so that meant that the stair needed to be near the front door, and the vertical access to the second floor would be part of that vertical expression. You know, we always begin by listening, That's how we start, because it's really important that homeowners are heard in the process. And they have a contemporary sensibility, which made me feel immediately that we would be sympathetic and we'd have a positive experience working together. But a lot of things like, they look to us for all the colors. We chose all the colors and most of the interior finishes we selected, but with them approving. They have the power of veto. But I really felt strongly that I wanted a brick that was unlike any other brick in the neighborhood, and very light and not heavy, and I mean light in two ways, weight-wise but also color-wise. So a light-colored brick gives the house a little more buoyancy and quite honestly differentiates it from what you see everywhere else. But yeah, the color choices and the materials choices are very much a result of a dialogue with the homeowners. But we start by listening. Yeah. So the notion that we spoke to a little bit earlier about blurring the boundaries between interior and exterior and creating, even in cold weather, an interior that felt connected to the outdoors, but especially in warm weather, to feel that there is a flow, both visually and functionally. That was really a huge driver here. And one of the things that I think we all agreed the owners and myself, was that the washing the interior with light from multiple directions would be highly desirable. We've all had the experience that when you're in a room that has just glass on one side, it feels very differently than a room that has light coming from multiple sides. And the more the better, as far as I'm concerned, particularly if we can also safeguard the thermal performance of the house. Now, all of the windows are triple pane, very high performance Zola windows, so preserving the thermal performance of the house could be accommodated while having a high degree of translucency. So coming in the front door, this desire for openness, not only front to back, that would bring the eye through the public space and out to the outdoor living area. That was sort of an obvious desire, but also creating a stair that accommodates the vertical circulation and allows the daylight to travel from front to back through devices that create separation. So in this area, it's entirely open, but in fact, every transition from one space to another is somewhere along a spectrum from entirely open on the one end to entirely closed on the other. And the art of design is finding that place along that spectrum that feels right. So this area, the stair, which have open risers that still meet code, and the bookshelf and the railing, this whole design was really in keeping with the idea that we wanted light to transfer from front to back, not only from front to back, but side to side. And so this little opening here is an expression of that. The way the fireplace is handled as a brief exception to the openness is an example of that. It's also doing structural work, but also the glazing in the stairwell that goes down above the landing and below the landing, and this is how we borrow light, not only front to back, but side to side and vertically, up and down. So we're making moves that borrow light from one space to another in multiple ways. So the high performance nature of this home is reflected in many ways, not the least of which is the mechanical systems, the geothermal systems, and the energy recovery ventilation system by Zender, but also the core thinking about the building envelope. There's 3 inches of continuous EPS foam insulation on the outside of the framing, and that's just one expression of how to build a high-performance home. And I would guess it's the only home in this neighborhood that plays by those rules. There's a lot of layers to that cake, but the first layer is to create a building envelope that does not lose the performance that it's generated. So there are air barriers and moisture barriers and weather barriers, all of which have been thoroughly considered and that translate all the way from the basement slab up to the roof, and they're continuous from top to bottom. I venture to say no other house in this neighborhood has that. Really important piece. The energy recovery ventilation we've talked about, so you get fresh air without throwing your conditioned air out the window. The Hydron module system that processes the geothermal heat source is a all-electric system so that the interior air remains healthy. You're not breathing petroleum products. It's not entirely free of carbon guilt, if you will, because LG&E is the source of the energy for the electrical, but that's another story. And then really the consistency, and I know Cy Safi of Uber Green Homes is meticulous about carrying the ideas all the way through from the basement up to the roof and making sure that any nail that penetrates through the air barrier or the moisture barrier is sealed with a product called Proseco, which is and it's one thing to think of these things, it's quite another thing to get the builders to actually coat the nails before they drive them through, and that rarely happens. And also things like making sure that your ducts systems are insulated and within the conditioned envelope. Those are mistakes that are often made in other homes. When there are things that I really commend the owners for recognizing, like if you look at this fireplace and the asymmetry of this fireplace, you know, that's something that they agreed to and I think quite like. There's a tendency among a lot of folks to default to symmetry, and what we really want is balance, not necessarily symmetry. And so that's a higher level of awareness around design, and the owners of this home understood those kinds of balance ideas, and that's very helpful. This home is really the definition of a smart home, in that the lighting can be controlled by one's phone. The front doors can be controlled by the phone. The televisions, virtually every aspect of the home has a smart component, and Century is to be commended for it. So when living in a space like this that has visual access to multiple areas at once, it's very convenient to be able to pull your phone out of your pocket as opposed to walking to 6 locations to control dimmer switches and so forth. So home security, all those things are smart home technology.